In math, trigonometry is how we move between the sides and the angles in a triangle. If you're given the side of a triangle and you're looking for an angle, you need to use trigonometry. If you're given an angle and then you're looking for a side, you need to use trigonometry. And if these triangles are right triangles, you're going to use right triangle trig, which is SOHCAHTOA. Before we move on how to find sides and angles in triangles, let's take a look at our calculator. So the TI Inspire has a trig button right here. And if you click that trig button, you're going to see a screen that looks just like this. So this has all the trig functions on it, but we don't use them all in geometry, just the first three: sine, cosine, and tangent. You'll also notice that the inverse trig functions are below them: inverse sine or arc cosine, and arctan. So these top functions we look for or we use when we're finding a side. So when we're looking for a side, so they give us an angle and we're looking for a side, we use those top functions. These bottom ones we use when we're finding an angle. Okay, so now that we have our functions all set up, let's take a look at a problem. So whenever I use a Regents question on one of my videos, you'll notice that in the description of the video, there's a link so that you can print out the Regents that this question is in. So this is in the August 2018 Regents. It's question number 6, and if you click the link, it'll take you to that Regents question so that you can print it out and follow along. The first thing we need to do in this question is first read it. Yolanda is making a springboard to use for gymnastics. She has 8-inch tall springs and wants to form a 16.5 degree angle with the base, as modeled in the diagram below. So it's always important to read that information, but in this instance, the diagram really does give us everything we need. Okay, now we're going to identify where the angle is. So the angle is right here in that triangle. So that's going to help us to determine a lot of things. First and foremost, across from this right angle is always our hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse, we actually don't need that angle for. We can do that the second we see our triangle. But once we find that angle, that's going to help us to identify the adjacent side. If you look at the other video that I posted on how to identify the sides in a triangle, I point this out a little bit more. But the hypotenuse and the other side that make that angle usually scream, ah! I know it's really cheesy, but the A in adjacent and the H in hypotenuse scream because that angle is being squeezed. So, that's how I know what goes where in the triangle. And then this last side over here is the opposite because it's opposite of the angle or opposite of that 16.5. So now we're going to take a look at SOHCAHTOA. So SOHCAHTOA. And if any of this is confusing, go watch that other video on the sides of a triangle. But when I'm looking at this, I'll notice that my hypotenuse has this x value and my opposite has this value of 8, but my adjacent doesn't have anything. So I'm not going to be using my adjacent, which means that sine is the function I'm going to be working with today. So if we set up our function, it's going to be sine, and inside that function, always inside that function goes our angle or our 16.5. And then we set it equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. So the opposite in this case is 8 and the hypotenuse is x. Now this may look kind of difficult to solve, but remember at the end of the day, it's really just algebra. You can put this sine of 16.5 over 1 and cross multiply. Now when you cross multiply, don't be intimidated by the sign, just remember your algebra rules. X times sine of 16.5 is just x times sine of 16.5. And I left that x in pink because that's what we're going to be solving for. Now, if I cross multiply the other way, 1 times 8 is 8. So that equals 8. So now again, I know this can be intimidating because there's a trig function in there, but it's just algebra. If sine of 16.5 is what's with the x, that's what we need to get rid of. So the way that we do that is we divide by sine of 16.5 on both sides. So I'm going to do it on this side and on this side. And don't be intimidated by the way things look because we have a very smart calculator that's going to do all the hard work for you. Those signs are going to reduce and I'm going to be left with just an x on this side. And then over here, this is what I'm going to be entering into my calculator. So 8 divided by sine of 16.5. Now, if you put that in the TI Inspire, let's see, it's going to look like this. 8 divided by sine of 16.5. So that is my answer. It's unrounded. And I want to just take note of one thing on this calculator screen before we move on. And that's this right here. You need to be in degree mode. In case you couldn't see that circle I made, I'll draw an arrow as well. You need to be in degree mode. If you're not, click the battery or the settings icon in the top right-hand corner and change it to degrees. If you don't get the right answer, if it doesn't quite look right, you're probably in radian mode. But that's a good thing to change the second you get your test. Make sure that you have your calculator and you put it right in degree mode. Now here it's multiple choice, so it's easy to see what the correct answer is, but I'm going to work on rounding anyway. This asks for the nearest tenth. So if I'm looking at this number, this is the tenths position, and this 6 is big enough to turn that 1 to a 2. So my answer would be 28.2. And if I take a look at my multiple choice answers, that's this answer right here. So this has been finding the side of a right triangle using trigonometry. If you have any questions on how to find an angle or again, how to label that triangle, go back to the channel and take a look at the other videos.